Hi, I'm Ariel, a graduate student at Duke University studying environmental management. I'm here today as part of my master's project to talk about lead ammunition and its risks in order to better protect wildlife and the health of hunters. This project was done in collaboration with the Great Coharie River Initiative, the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, and the Duke Superfund Community Engagement Corps. In order to understand the risks of lead ammunition, it's important to understand how lead ammunition can expose humans and the environment to lead. The first of these ways is through ammunition fragments. Given that lead is a soft metal, when it comes into contact with the larger bones of game animals, it can shatter and fragment, leaving small pieces of lead throughout the meat. These pieces are often too small to be felt or seen. Additionally, when a gun is fired that uses lead ammunition, it will leave a puff of lead dust in the air. This dust, or aerosolized lead, can then settle onto clothing, skin, plants, or trees. This settled lead dust is called lead residue. Through these three ways, ammunition can expose us to lead. The first of these is through lead fragments. Lead fragments pose the greatest risk because they cause us to ingest fairly large quantities of lead all at once. Additionally, lead fragments can pose a threat beyond just to ourselves and can include anyone who is consuming that game meat. It has been found that people who consume wild game meat hunted with lead ammunition tend to have higher levels of blood lead than those who do not. Additionally, it is possible to expose ourselves to lead through aerosolized lead. This can come from accidentally ingesting lead residue, such as having lead still left in your hands and touching your face or mouth, or it can come through not wearing eye protection and having that little cloud of dust get into your eyes, and it can come from contaminated clothing, so touching your clothes and then touching your face or mouth. In terms of how this actually impacts our health, lead moves through the blood to the brain, liver, and kidneys before settling and even accumulating in our teeth and bones. While it does this, it can cause a variety of impacts, including increased risk of high blood pressure, cardiovascular problems, kidney damage, reproductive issues, and in the worst case scenarios, even death. After lead has accumulated, it can build up and then can be re-released during times of stress or pregnancy. When it's released during pregnancy, this can even impact the fetus, as well as getting into young babies' bodies during breastfeeding. In terms of children's health, these impacts become exacerbated. They are much smaller, so a small amount of lead can impact a child much more easily than it can impact an adult. In addition to all of the previous threats on that previous slide, there's also a risk to children's brain development. This can lead to reduced IQ, reduced attention and focus, intellectual disabilities, behavioral disorders, and even more issues. Therefore, it is recommended that children under 6, pregnant women, and nursing mothers should avoid eating game hunted with lead ammunition in order to avoid these impacts on these smaller bodies. Lead also impacts the environment in a variety of ways. When there's aerosolized lead in the air, this can settle on plants and trees that are surrounding it, leading to contaminated soils and plants. This contaminated soil typically has lower fertility and sustainability and can impact and limit plant growth and have other downstream ecological effects. Soil contamination can also impact people, largely gardeners and children, who frequently find themselves with their hands in the dirt, which can risk putting their hands in their mouth and exposing them to lead as well. While this isn't a huge issue with hunting because you don't fire that many rounds, this is a big issue with shooting ranges where there's more often ammunition usage. Additionally, there is the possibility of lead getting into the environment through field dressing. So because of those ammunition fragments, if you field dress your game meat, it can wind up with the carcasses being left in the field, and scavenging animals such as the California condor or the bald eagle can come and eat that and become exposed to that lead. Because birds are not very dense animals, this can be a very exacerbated issue and can cause a lot of birds to die. In the US, nearly half of the bald eagles have chronic lead poisoning, and we believe that to be from lead ammunition. Therefore, it's recommended to bury carcass remains of game harvested with lead ammunition to avoid exposing scavengers to the best of our abilities. Because of this, we can move on to understand how different ammunition types can be better or worse for the environment and ourselves. Obviously, the best case scenario we have is lead-free ammunition. It leaves no lead in the meat and can protect both ourselves and the environment. That being said, I would be wrong to not acknowledge the challenge of finding lead ammunition and the cost barrier. Therefore, we can break this down into categories of worst and better. The worst kinds of ammunitions are rapidly expanding bullets like ballistic tips and soft points. This is because the high risk of fragmentation allows the lead to spread throughout the meat and can impact you more. On the better side of things, there's shotgun slugs, muzzleloader bullets, non-exposed lead core bullets. And due to their slower velocity, higher mass, or having metal completely covering the lead, there is less risk of fragmentation and less risk of exposing yourself or possible scavenging animals to that lead. Finally, we can get into ways to remove or reduce fragments in the case of continuing to use lead ammunition for any reason. The main one here is to make sure you wash your hands after using your firearms. This means washing your hands with both soap and water, because hand sanitizer is not as effective in removing lead residue. Additionally, always wear eye protection, that way that aerosolized lead cannot enter your body through your eyes. In terms of cooking, it's important to avoid acids such as wine and vinegar. This is because acid allows our bodies to absorb lead more readily. In addition to avoiding acids, there's other cooking steps that can be taken to better avoid those fragments. One of these is to make sure you don't rinse the carcass, because this can spread the lead to other parts of the meat. It has also been found that ground venison has more lead fragments compared to things like venison steak and chops because of not spreading that lead throughout. Finally, in terms of cooking, it's best not to eat the organs from any wild game, because any lead or chemicals build up in those organs. Next, we can move on to talking about shot placement. So I've written here make ethical and effective harvests, and what I mean by that is that shots that go through larger bones, like the hindquarters of a deer or a bear, will fragment more than those into soft tissue. Additionally, on this note, it is possible that some processors will combine several deer or other game meat. In order to make sure that your meat is not contaminated by others, if possible, you can express to your processor that you would like your meat handled separately. Additionally, it's important to use the appropriate ammunition for the target species so that it fragments as little as possible. And finally, and very logically, when possible, the fragments travel far. So trim as much as you can around the wound channel to make sure you're not ingesting any of that fragmented lead. Thank you guys all so much for your time, and I appreciate watching this presentation.